First time I realized my life no longer belonged to me was the morning my ex-husband showed up at my door with my sister standing behind him, both of them smiling like they were here to help. I was still in scrubs. It was 6:18 a.m. My shift at the assisted living facility had ended less than an hour earlier. My youngest, Noah, was asleep on the couch with a blanket tucked under his chin. My daughter, Lily, was still in her room, backpack ready for school. And my sister, Rebecca Miller, had the nerve to say, "We just want to talk." Before I take you any further, if stories about family betrayal, quiet revenge, and justice that comes late but lands hard mean something to you, take a second. Like this. Subscribe if you want to hear how this ends. And tell me where you're listening from. It matters more than you think. My name is Hannah Brooks. I'm 32 years old. I'm a licensed practical nurse in the state of Pennsylvania, and for the past 6 years, I've worked nights caring for elderly patients who don't have anyone else. I'm also a single mother of 2. That part usually makes people soften. Until they realize, I don't ask for help. My ex-husband, Daniel Brooks, knew exactly what he was doing when he left. He waited until my second pregnancy was far enough along that I couldn't work double shifts anymore. Then he told me he felt trapped, that he needed space, that he was moving in with a friend. The friend was my sister. Rebecca didn't say it outright at first. She just stopped answering my calls. Then she showed up at Thanksgiving wearing Daniel's jacket. By Christmas, they were together. My parents, Margaret and Thomas Miller, called it complicated. They asked me to be understanding. Rebecca was going through a hard time, they said. Daniel deserved happiness, they said. I deserve silence, apparently. I rebuilt anyway. I took the overnight shifts no one wanted. I specialized in memory care, end-of-life patients, and private in-home hospice. I learned how to read charts in low light, how to calm someone who didn't remember their own name, how to sit with a person while they died, without making it about myself. That's how I met Eleanor Whitmore. Eleanor was 87 when I first walked into her house in Bryn Mawr, a stone mansion with ivy crawling up the sides and rooms that echoed even when you whispered. She lived alone. Her husband had died 10 years earlier. No children, no close relatives. She looked at me once and said, "You're too young to look this tired." I smiled and told her she was too old to be that observant. We understood each other immediately. I cared for Eleanor for 3 years. Nights at first, then days, then both when her health declined. I cooked her meals, managed her medications, read to her when her hands shook too badly to hold a book. I never talked about my family unless she asked. When she did, she listened, the way people do when they're not planning to interrupt. "Do they help with the children?" she asked once. "No," I said. She nodded. That tells me enough. When Eleanor died, it was quiet. Early morning. I was holding her hand. She squeezed my fingers once, like she was making a decision. 2 weeks later, I was called into a law office in Center City. That's when everything broke open. The attorney, a man named Charles Redmond, slid a document across the desk and said, "Ms. Brooks, Eleanor Whitmore named you as the sole beneficiary of her estate." I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was impossible. There had to be a mistake. There wasn't. The estate was valued at just over $30 million. The house, the investments, the trusts, all of it. I walked out of that office shaking. I didn't tell anyone right away. I went home. I made dinner. I helped Lily with her spelling homework. I watched Noah fall asleep with his thumb in his mouth, and then I cried in the bathroom with the door locked, because I knew exactly what would happen next. I was right. Word got out faster than I expected. Rebecca called first. "I always knew Eleanor loved you," she said, voice sweet. "You deserve something good for once." Daniel texted that night. "We should talk, for the kids." My parents invited me to dinner. Suddenly. And that's how I found myself standing in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, facing my ex-husband and my sister, while my children slept 10 feet away. Rebecca sat at the table like she belonged there. Daniel leaned against the counter like he'd never left. "This money," my father said later that day on the phone, "it changes things." He wasn't wrong. It changed how quickly they stopped pretending I was invisible. But it also changed something else. It reminded me of every birthday forgotten, every holiday I showed up alone, every time I was told to be patient, to be the bigger person, to let things go. They thought the money made me weak. What they didn't understand was that it finally gave me room to breathe. And once you can breathe, you can plan. By the end of that week, Rebecca had asked for a loan. Daniel suggested reconciliation. My parents hinted at a family trust. I said nothing. I watched. I listened. And I learned exactly how much my worth had always been tied to what I could give them. The real betrayal hadn't happened yet, but it was already on its way. And when it arrived, I was ready. Money doesn't change people. It just removes the need for patience. By Monday morning, my phone had become a suggestion box for everyone who had ever decided I was optional. Rebecca called again while I was driving Lily to school. She waited until I pulled into the drop-off line, the exact moment I couldn't easily hang up. "I've been thinking," she said, too casually. "With what you inherited, it might make sense to keep things in the family." I didn't answer right away. Lily leaned over from the back seat and kissed my cheek before hopping out of the car. I watched her walk toward the building, backpack bouncing, unaware that her world was about to be evaluated by people who had never once shown up for it. "What does that mean?" I asked. Rebecca laughed softly. "Don't be defensive. I just mean Eleanor would have wanted her legacy protected." "Eleanor wanted me to have it," I said. A pause. Not long. Just enough to recalibrate. "Of course," she replied. "I'm just saying we should talk. Daniel and I are thinking about the kids." The kids. Always the kids. As leverage. As currency. I hung up without responding. At work that night, I moved through my shift with a strange clarity. Charting medications. Repositioning patients. Speaking gently to people who didn't know what day it was, but knew when someone was being kind to them. One of my patients, a retired machinist named Harold King, grabbed my wrist when I adjusted his IV. "You're somewhere else," he said. "I'm fine," I replied. He shook his head slowly. "That's not what fine looks like." I smiled at him. "You're very perceptive for someone on morphine," he snorted. "You don't need to be sober to recognize trouble." When I got home at dawn, there was an envelope taped to my door, handwritten, from my parents. Inside was an invitation. Dinner, Wednesday night, their house, formal, without being official. The kind of gathering that looked harmless until you remembered how often it had been used to corner me. I didn't respond. Wednesday came anyway. Daniel showed up unannounced that afternoon. This time, alone. He stood in my doorway, hands in his pockets, wearing the jacket I'd bought him 3 years before he left. "I miss the kids," he said. "They live 5 miles away," I replied. "You can file for visitation like everyone else." He flinched. "You don't have to be like this." "Like what?" I asked. "Cold," he said. I looked at him carefully. Really looked. The man who had watched me work 16-hour shifts while pregnant. The man who'd moved his things out while I was at work and left a note on the counter. "This is me being clear," I said. "Cold would have been disappearing." He sighed. "Rebecca says you're angry." "I'm observant," I replied. That night, my parents called again. My mother, Margaret Miller, spoke first. "We're worried about you." "I'm working," I said. "That's exactly it," my father, Thomas Miller, cut in. "You don't know how to manage this kind of responsibility." There it was. The same sentence they'd used when I chose nursing over accounting. When I moved out at 21. When I divorced Daniel instead of forgiving him. "What responsibility?" I asked. "This inheritance," he said. $30 million is not something a single mother should be handling alone. Single mother. Emphasis intentional. "I've been handling 2 children, night shifts, and hospice patients alone for years," I said. "This isn't new." Silence. Then my mother again, softer. "We just want what's best for the family." I hung up. That was when I called Charles Redmond back. "I need to understand exactly what Eleanor left me," I said. He didn't hesitate. "Everything. No conditions. No shared control." She was very explicit. "Did she mention my family?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "She instructed that no member of your immediate family be involved in any decision-making." My stomach tightened. "She anticipated this," I said. "She was very clear-eyed," Charles replied. The next day, Rebecca sent a message that dropped the mask completely. "If you don't cooperate, Mom and Dad are considering contesting the will." There it was. The first real threat. I stared at my phone for a long time, then typed back one sentence. "On what grounds?" Her response came quickly. "Undue influence. You were her nurse." I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. Not fear, recognition. They weren't after help, or fairness, or reconciliation. They wanted control. At dinner that night, my parents laid it out. Rebecca sat beside them, hand resting possessively on the table. Daniel didn't come. He didn't need to. He'd already made his choice. "You should do the right thing," my father said. "Split it." "With who?" I asked. "With the family," my mother said. "It's what Eleanor would have wanted." "You just told me she was confused," I said. "Which is it?" Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "Don't be difficult." "I've been difficult since the day I stopped letting you decide my life," I said. My father leaned forward. "If you don't agree to place the assets into a family trust, we'll pursue legal action." I nodded slowly. "Okay." They blinked. Rebecca frowned. "Okay?" "Yes," I said. "You should do that." The table went quiet. They had expected pleading, bargaining, tears. They didn't expect consent. That night, after I tucked the kids into bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table and opened a folder Charles had emailed earlier that day. Eleanor's personal notes, letters, addendums to the will. One line stood out. "If they try to take this from you, let them show who they are." I slept better than I had in months. By Friday, the papers were filed. My family was officially contesting the will. They thought they were cornering a tired nurse with 2 kids and a conscience. What they didn't know was that Eleanor had prepared me for this. And she had left me more than money. She had left me evidence. And the next time we sat across from each other, the room would not feel so familiar. Because once a threat is made out loud, it stops being theoretical. It becomes a plan. And I had just started mine. The first thing you lose when people decide you owe them is privacy. By Monday, my name was circulating in places it had never been before. A nurse with 2 kids, a sudden inheritance, a contested will. The story didn't need embellishment. People did that on their own. Rebecca stopped calling. She didn't need to. My parents' attorney did it for her. His name was Stephen Caldwell. I learned that when he left a voicemail at 9:12 a.m., precise and polite, the kind of voice that assumes compliance as a starting point. "Miss Brooks, this is Stephen Caldwell, representing Margaret and Thomas Miller in the matter of the Whitmore estate. We are requesting a meeting to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution." Mutually beneficial. I replayed the message twice, then deleted it. Instead, I called Charles Redmond. "They filed under undue influence," I said. "What does that actually mean for me?" "It means they're alleging Eleanor lacked capacity, and that you exploited your position as a caregiver," he replied. "It's a serious accusation, but it requires proof." "Do they have any?" I asked. Charles paused. "They have suspicion. And a family narrative." I closed my eyes. I could already hear it. Hannah was always around. Hannah isolated her. Hannah controlled access. She had a full medical team, I said. Doctors, social workers, financial advisors. "Yes," Charles said. "And she documented everything." That was the part Eleanor had been meticulous about. The next few days blurred into routines layered over tension. I worked my shifts, packed lunches, signed permission slips, pretended everything was normal while waiting for something to drop. It did. On Thursday afternoon, my supervisor, Karen Lopez, called me into her office before my shift. She didn't smile. "Hannah," she said, folding her hands, "I need to ask you a few questions." I sat down slowly. "Someone contacted the facility," she continued. "They raised concerns about a former patient of yours." "Eleanor." "What kind of concerns?" I asked. Karen hesitated. "They suggested you may have crossed professional boundaries." There it was. My sister didn't need to say my name. She just had to say nurse and money in the same sentence. "I followed protocol," I said. "Every visit was documented. Every interaction." "I know," Karen replied. "This isn't disciplinary, but compliance will need to review your file." "When?" I asked. "Immediately," she said. I nodded. "Okay." I went back onto the floor and finished my shift like nothing had changed. I bathed patients, checked vitals, sat with a woman named Ruth Patterson while she cried because she thought her husband was still alive. I didn't rush her. I never did. When my shift ended, I drove home with my hands locked tight on the steering wheel. Not because I was scared, but because I was calculating. Rebecca wasn't just contesting the will. She was trying to take my livelihood. That night, Daniel showed up again. This time, with papers. "I'm filing for joint custody," he said, holding them out like an offering. It's better this way. For who? I asked. For the kids, he said automatically. I took the papers and glanced at the header. His attorney's name, Melissa Harding. I recognized it. She'd represented Rebecca in a real estate dispute years earlier. You couldn't even find your own lawyer, I said. He bristled. Rebecca recommended her. Of course she did. They're asking for weekends and overnights, he continued, and financial adjustments. Based on what income? I asked. He didn't answer. I handed the papers back. Have them served properly. His jaw tightened. You don't have to make this harder. I didn't, I said. You did. After he left, I locked the door and slid down against it, not crying, just breathing through the pressure in my chest. This was the part people never talk about, when betrayal multiplies, when every relationship becomes a lever. The next morning, Charles called me early. We need to meet, he said, today. His office smelled like paper and coffee. He laid out documents across the desk, methodical. Eleanor anticipated a will contest, he said. She left recorded statements, physician affidavits, and a timeline of her decisions. He slid one document forward. She also amended her will 6 months before she died, he continued. After consulting an independent ethics board regarding caregiver beneficiaries, I blinked. She did what? She made sure no one could credibly accuse you of manipulation, he said. I exhaled slowly. There's more, he added. She left instructions. For what? I asked. For when your family escalated, he replied. He handed me a sealed envelope. Eleanor's handwriting was unmistakable, firm, slanted slightly to the right. Inside was a letter. Hannah, if you're reading this, they have decided money matters more than you. Let them prove it publicly. Do not settle quietly. My hands were steady as I folded the letter. What happens next? I asked. Charles leaned back. Discovery, depositions, and scrutiny. Good, I said. He raised an eyebrow. I'm tired of being quiet, I continued. If they want to put me on trial, I want the room full. That afternoon, compliance cleared my file. No violations, no concerns. Karen apologized for the stress, but the damage had been attempted, and that mattered. That evening, my parents sent a group email. Subject: family meeting required. Rebecca added a reply all within minutes. This doesn't have to be ugly. I stared at the screen and thought about Eleanor's hand squeezing mine once before she died. Then I replied to all, see you in court. That was when I understood something important. They weren't trying to take my money. They were trying to put me back in my place. And they were about to learn how expensive that instinct can be. Because the next phase wasn't about defense anymore. It was about exposure. And once a family chooses a courtroom, they don't get to control the narrative. Not anymore. Court papers changed the temperature of a room. By the time the formal notice arrived, the house felt smaller. Not because anything had moved, but because everything had weight, a date, a docket number, language that didn't care about intention, only proof. The petition accused me of exerting undue influence over Eleanor Whitmore during the final years of her life. It cited my role as a caregiver. It implied isolation. It suggested emotional manipulation. Rebecca's fingerprints were all over it, even though her name appeared nowhere. Charles Redmond called it what it was. They're building a story, not a case. Stories are dangerous when people are used to being believed. The first deposition was scheduled for my mother. Margaret Miller had always been careful with words. She cried easily, but selectively. She had mastered the art of appearing wounded without ever being responsible. I didn't attend her deposition. Charles did. When he called me afterward, he sounded tired. She said you were overwhelmed, he told me. That you leaned on Eleanor too much. That you were struggling financially and emotionally. I laughed once, sharply. She never asked how I was. No, he said. But she implied you needed saving. The next deposition was Rebecca's. That one I listened to from a conference room speaker. Muted, except when I needed to hear my name. Rebecca spoke confidently. About my exhaustion. About how close I'd become to Eleanor. About how inappropriate it felt. Inappropriate how? The opposing counsel asked. Well, Rebecca said, pausing just long enough to look thoughtful. She started relying on Hannah for everything. Decisions, emotional support. It didn't feel healthy. I stared at the wall. Rebecca had never visited Eleanor alone. Not once. She didn't know which chair she preferred or which soup she hated. or that she slept with the radio on because silence reminded her too much of being alone. She just knew what it looked like from the outside, and that was enough for her. The third deposition was Daniel's. That one hurt differently. He spoke about my long hours, about how stressed I was after the divorce, about how I'd complained about money. I worried she wasn't thinking clearly, he said. She was exhausted. I had been exhausted from carrying everything alone. He never mentioned how often he'd missed pickups, or how many school events I attended without him, or that the last time he saw Eleanor, he'd asked her what she planned to do with the house. He didn't need to lie. He just needed to leave things out. By the end of the week, I understood the shape of their strategy. Paint me as unstable, overworked, vulnerable. Then paint Eleanor as confused. It was clean, efficient. It would have worked on someone else. Charles brought me a binder thick enough to strain the table. This is Eleanor's counterweight, he said. Inside were medical evaluations, cognitive assessments, notes from her financial advisor, emails to her attorney, video recordings made at her insistence. One of them was dated 9 months before her death. She sat in her study, hair brushed, eyes sharp. My nurse, Hannah Brooks, Eleanor said into the camera, has never asked me for anything beyond what her job required. I am leaving my estate to her because she showed up when no one else did. This is my decision. It is not confusion. It is clarity. I watched the video twice. Then I sat back and felt something unfamiliar. Not relief. Momentum. The next escalation came through the kids. Daniel filed an emergency motion to revise custody, citing instability caused by ongoing litigation and sudden wealth. Sudden wealth. As if it were a symptom. He requested temporary primary custody. I received the notice while helping Noah with a puzzle on the floor. The edges of the paper trembled in my hand. This was no longer about money. This was about punishment. Charles was blunt. They're trying to exhaust you. Good, I said. I'm well rested. That wasn't bravado. It was truth. I had stopped running months ago. Stopped explaining. Stopped hoping. At the custody hearing, Daniel sat with Rebecca behind him, one hand on his shoulder, like she was stabilizing him. I sat alone. The judge, a woman named Teresa Holloway, listened carefully. Daniel's attorney spoke about consistency, about structure, about how children need calm environments. My attorney responded with facts, my work schedule, my childcare arrangements, the kids' grades, letters from teachers, a statement from Lily's counselor. When the judge asked Daniel about his housing situation, he hesitated. I'm staying with Rebecca, he said. The judge looked up. Your former sister-in-law? Yes, he said. She raised an eyebrow. Temporary arrangements, his attorney said quickly. Judge Holloway made a note. In the end, she denied the motion. There is no evidence that Ms. Brooks is an unfit parent, she said. Litigation stress does not constitute instability. Daniel didn't look at me as we left the court. Rebecca did. Her eyes weren't angry. They were calculating. That night, my parents invited me to dinner again. I didn't go. Instead, I opened Eleanor's final letter. There were several. This one I'd saved for when things got loud. Hannah, families like yours don't break loudly. They erode. Don't mistake familiarity for safety. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the folder. The next morning, Charles called. They've requested mediation, he said. I smiled. Tell them no, I said. He paused. You're sure? Yes, I replied. They don't want peace. They want control without witnesses. He exhaled. Then we prepare for trial. That afternoon, Rebecca sent a message I didn't expect. This is hurting everyone, especially Mom. I typed one response. You should have thought about that before you involved my children. She didn't reply. The house was quiet that night. The kids asleep, dishes done, papers stacked neatly on the counter. I stood at the window and watched headlights pass. This wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part had been surviving quietly. This was just documentation. And in the end, documentation always tells the truth, even when families don't. By the time I turned off the lights, I knew something else. They had underestimated how much Eleanor had seen, and they had forgotten one important thing. Nurses don't flinch when things get messy. We clean up, and we remember everything. The moment they asked for mediation, I knew they were running out of clean moves. Mediation is what people ask for when they want to appear reasonable without admitting fault. It's control wrapped in civility, a room without witnesses, a paper trail that looks cooperative, I said no, because I wanted daylight. Charles Redmond didn't argue. He just nodded and started preparing exhibits. That week, I adjusted my life the way nurses always do when things turn critical. I tightened routines. I simplified meals. I arranged backup childcare. I moved money into a trust for Lily and Noah that no one else could touch. I didn't announce any of it. At work, I picked up extra private shifts, not for the money, for the steadiness. There is something grounding about helping someone bathe, about folding clean sheets, about checking a pulse and knowing exactly what it means. The world narrows to what matters. That's where Rebecca couldn't follow me. On Wednesday, my supervisor called me into her office again. Karen Lopez closed the door and slid a document across the desk. "Subpoena," she said. "They're requesting employment records, schedules, performance reviews." I skimmed it. Standard, aggressive, predictable. "They're trying to show you were overwhelmed," Karen added quietly. "I want you to know we'll comply, and we'll be honest." I met her eyes. "Thank you," she hesitated. "Hannah, I've watched you for years. This won't stick." "It doesn't have to," I said. "It just has to be seen." That night, Rebecca sent another message. "Can we talk privately? No lawyers, just us." I didn't respond. Instead, I received an email from my mother. Subject: As a family. Margaret wrote about love, about forgiveness, about how Eleanor would be heartbroken to see us divided. She didn't mention the petition, or the custody motion, or the compliance report. She asked me to come to dinner on Sunday. She said my father wasn't well. She said Rebecca was struggling. I read it once, then forwarded it to Charles. His reply came back immediately. "They're setting a stage." Exactly. Sunday afternoon, Daniel dropped the kids off early. He lingered in the doorway. "Mom says you won't come to dinner," he said. "That's correct," I replied. "They just want to talk." "They want leverage," I said. He frowned. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I looked at him carefully. "You filed for emergency custody." He opened his mouth. Closed it. "I'm not making this harder," I continued. "I'm making it visible." He left without another word. At 6 o'clock, my phone buzzed. "Rebecca, we're all here. Mom's crying. Dad's blood pressure is up. If something happens, that's on you." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed, "If you wanted family, you wouldn't have tried to take my children." I set the phone face down and turned it off. The next morning, Charles called with news. "They've added an allegation," he said. "They're claiming Eleanor promised to provide for the family and that you interfered." I laughed, short and humorless. "Promised how?" "Verbally," he said. "No documentation." "Eleanor didn't promise anything verbally," I said. "She wrote everything down." "Yes," he replied, "which is why they're escalating." By Thursday, the local paper picked up the story. Not my name. Not yet. But the headline mentioned a contested multi-million-dollar estate involving a caregiver. I felt it then. The shift. This was no longer private litigation. It was public curiosity. I took Lily and Noah out for pizza that night. We sat in a booth by the window. Lily dipped fries in ketchup and told me about a science project. Noah stacked sugar packets into a tower. "Mom," Lily said suddenly, "are we in trouble?" I took a breath. "No. Because Grandma said you took something that wasn't yours," she continued, carefully. My chest tightened. When did she say that? "On the phone," Lily said. "She said sometimes grown-ups make mistakes." I nodded slowly. "Did she say anything else?" Lily shrugged. "She said we'd be okay when this was over." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You are okay now." That was the line. Rebecca had crossed it. I called Charles the moment we got home. "They're talking to my children," I said. There was a pause. Then his voice hardened. "That changes the calculus," he said. "We can file for a protective order." "Do it," I said. Friday morning, the order was granted. No contact with the kids outside of legal channels. No indirect messaging. No phone calls framed as concern. Daniel was furious. He called twice, left one voicemail. "You're turning this into a war." I deleted it. That afternoon, Charles invited me into his office to review trial strategy. He laid out the sequence: the witnesses, the video statements, the medical records, the compliance reports from my employer, the custody ruling. "This is strong," he said, "but they're not backing down." "Neither am I," I replied. He studied me. Why? I thought about Eleanor's house, about the quiet mornings, about how she'd trusted me to show up when it mattered. Because they don't believe I'm allowed to say no, I said. And I am. That night, as the kids slept, I recorded a short statement at Charles's request. Just facts, just dates, just the truth. No emotion, no pleading. When I finished, I sat at the kitchen table and realized something else. If this story is sounding familiar to you, pause here. Like this if you want the truth to keep coming. Subscribe if you want to see how this plays out. And if you've ever been told to stay quiet for the sake of family, leave a comment. You're not alone. Because what came next wasn't subtle. It wasn't private. And it wasn't kind. On Monday morning, Rebecca filed a motion that made my hands go cold when I read it. She was requesting a court-appointed guardian to oversee my finances during the proceedings. The implication was clear. I wasn't just untrustworthy, I was unfit. And that was the moment the gloves came off. Because once someone tries to take your autonomy, you don't negotiate, you expose. And I had exactly what Eleanor had prepared me for. Proof they couldn't explain away. With a motion that dared the court to decide whether a nurse who had raised 2 children alone was capable of managing her own life. And with me, finally, ready to answer that question in public. The motion for a financial guardian was designed to humiliate, not protect. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, buried under legal language that pretended to be concerned while quietly stripping me of agency. They cited stress, emotional instability, sudden wealth. The same words repackaged again and again until they hoped one of them would stick. Charles Redmond called me within minutes of receiving it. They're asking the court to temporarily restrict your access to the estate, he said. Not seize it. Monitor it. Monitor by whom? I asked. They've suggested a neutral party, he replied. One they happened to have worked with before. Of course they had. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. What's the likelihood? In isolation, Charles said. Low. In context? He paused. They're testing whether the judge is willing to doubt you. They want me to look unstable, I said. Yes, he replied. And reactive. I smiled faintly. Then we disappoint them. That night, after I put Lily and Noah to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out the binder Eleanor had insisted I keep. The one she called insurance. It wasn't legal paperwork. It was correspondence, emails, notes, observations. The first entry was dated almost 2 years earlier. Hannah arrived on time, stayed late, declined my offer to pay her extra when I asked her to attend a family dinner. She said her children needed her. Another entry. I asked Hannah if she ever worried about money. She said she worries about time. Eleanor had been documenting not just her decisions, but my boundaries. She knew exactly what they would say. The hearing on the guardian motion was scheduled quickly. Emergency basis. Friday morning. Judge Teresa Holloway presided again. Rebecca arrived with confidence sharpened into something brittle. She wore a navy suit and carried a leather folder she kept adjusting, as if the weight of it mattered. My parents sat behind her. Daniel sat at the end of the row, arms crossed, jaw tight. I sat alone at the table with Charles. When Rebecca's attorney stood, his voice was smooth. Your Honor, we are not suggesting Ms. Brooks is malicious. We are suggesting she is overwhelmed. There it was again. She is a single mother, he continued. She works long hours. She has experienced sudden and extreme financial change. Temporary oversight would protect all parties. Judge Holloway leaned forward. Including the children? Yes, he said quickly. Charles rose calmly. Your Honor, he said, this motion rests on an assumption that Ms. Brooks was competent enough to inherit, but not competent enough to manage. He paused. That contradiction matters. He submitted evidence. My trust set up for the children. My financial advisor's affidavit. Documentation of my work schedule adjustments. A statement from my employer. Then he did something unexpected. He played a video. Eleanor sat on the screen, hands folded, eyes steady. If anyone ever questions Hannah Brooks's judgment, Eleanor said, I ask the court to consider this. I was evaluated by 3 physicians. I consulted an ethics board. I chose Hannah because she has integrity. If someone tries to take this from her by calling her unstable, they are revealing themselves, not her. The room went very still. Judge Holloway didn't look at me. She looked at Rebecca. "Ms. Miller," she said, "are you alleging misconduct or incapacity?" Rebecca hesitated. "Just a fraction." "Incapacity," she said. "Temporary." Judge Holloway nodded once. "I find no basis for this motion," she said. "It is denied." The gavel struck. Rebecca's face didn't change, but her shoulders tightened. That was the moment I knew. They were running out of rooms. Outside the courtroom, my mother reached for my arm. "Hannah," Margaret said, voice shaking. "This is getting out of hand." I stepped back. "You filed this," I said. "Not me." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Daniel approached next. "You don't have to keep pushing," he said. "This is hurting everyone." I looked at him steadily. "You asked a judge to take my children." He looked away. Charles leaned in. "We should go." We did. That afternoon, something shifted. Not externally. Internally. For the first time since Eleanor's death, I felt grounded. They had thrown everything they could at me, and I was still standing. Still employed. Still parenting. Still in control. That evening, Karen Lopez called me. "I heard about the hearing," she said. "Compliance closed your file permanently." "Thank you," I said. She hesitated. "You should know something." "What?" I asked. "Someone called again," she said. "Your sister. She asked if we'd reconsider your role given the publicity." My jaw tightened. "And?" "I told her we don't discipline staff based on gossip," Karen said, "and that if she contacted us again, we'd document it as harassment." I swallowed. "Thank you." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen and felt something new. Anger. Not loud. Not explosive. Focused. Rebecca had tried to take my work, my money, my children, my autonomy. And she had failed. But she wasn't done. The next escalation came through a place I hadn't expected. Eleanor's house. On Saturday morning, I received a notice from the city, a zoning complaint, alleging unsafe modifications, potential code violations, files anonymously. But I recognized the timing. Charles was blunt. "They're trying to freeze the property, delay probate." "Can they?" I asked. "They can try," he said, "but it requires inspection." "Then we let them inspect," I replied. The inspector arrived Tuesday, a man named Robert Klein. Thorough, neutral. He walked the house room by room, checked permits, examined stair railings, electrical panels. After 2 hours, he signed off. "No violations," he said. "Whoever filed this wasted my time." As he left, he added quietly, "You'd be surprised how often families do this to each other." That night, Rebecca sent me a message. "You're dragging this out," I replied once. "You started it." She didn't answer. But 2 days later, Charles called with news that finally made me sit down. "They've requested a jury trial," he said. My breath caught. "Why?" "Because they think emotion will sway people more than facts," he replied. "They want sympathy." I closed my eyes. A jury meant exposure, testimony, strangers evaluating my life. It also meant something else. "They want a story," I said. "Yes," Charles replied, "and we have the truth." I looked at the calendar. The date circled in red. Trial was set for 6 weeks out. That gave me time. Time to prepare. Time to gather witnesses. Time to decide exactly how much of myself I was willing to show in public. Because the next chapter wasn't about survival anymore. It was about choosing what to reveal. And once a truth is spoken in a courtroom, it doesn't go back in the dark. Not ever. A jury changes everything. With a judge, you argue law. With a jury, you argue perception. Charles Redmond said it plainly the first morning we met to prepare. Facts win cases. Stories win juries. We're going to give them both. I nodded, but my stomach tightened anyway. I had spent my adult life being careful not to be noticed. Nursing taught you that. You do your job well, quietly, and people remember the outcome, not your name. Now strangers were going to sit in a box and decide whether I was a caregiver or a manipulator, a mother or a threat. Rebecca understood this. That's why she wanted a jury. The first thing Charles did was take control of my narrative before anyone else could. We built a timeline, not just Eleanor's decline, but my life alongside it. Dates, hours, numbers. He didn't want adjectives. He wanted structure. How many shifts did you work per week when you met Eleanor Whitmore? He asked. 5, I said. Overnights. And when her condition worsened? 6, sometimes 7. How many hours per shift? 12. How old were your children at that time? Lily was 6. Noah was 3. He wrote it down. And did Eleanor ever increase your pay beyond the contracted rate? No. Did you ever ask? No. Did you ever discuss inheritance? Never. He looked up at me. You see what we're doing? We're making it boring, I said. He smiled. Exactly. Boring is credible. The next step was witness preparation. Karen Lopez agreed to testify. So did 2 of Eleanor's physicians, her financial advisor, the social worker assigned during her last year. Even Robert Klein, the city inspector, said he'd appear if subpoenaed. People who had nothing to gain don't exaggerate. They don't perform. They just answer. Rebecca's list looked different. My mother, my father, Daniel. 2 distant relatives who had visited Eleanor once. A former co-worker of mine who'd been reprimanded years earlier and still resented it. Charles called it what it was. They're building emotion. That week, the paper ran another article. This time, my name was included. No photo, just words. A nurse, 2 children, $30 million. The comments were split. Some people called me lucky. Others called me suspicious. One comment stuck with me. If it were my mother, I'd never leave that kind of money to a stranger. I stared at the screen, then closed the browser. Eleanor hadn't been my mother. She'd been an adult who made a decision. People hate that more than betrayal. They hate choice. Rebecca called that night. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. You don't have to do this, she said. You're making us look like monsters. I listened to it once, then deleted it. The next day, Daniel showed up at the school. Lily's teacher called me at work. He's listed as her father, she said carefully. He asked to speak with her. Did he? I asked. Yes, she said. But Lily seemed upset. I left work early. Lily sat in the counselor's office when I arrived, legs swinging, jaw set. He told me you were taking something that belonged to our family, she said quietly. I knelt in front of her. Did he say anything else? She nodded. He said, sometimes grown-ups lie when they're scared. My chest tightened. That was inappropriate, I said evenly. And I'm sorry. Are you lying? She asked. I met her eyes. No, she nodded once. That was enough for her. It was more than enough for me. That afternoon, Charles filed a motion to restrict direct contact between Daniel and the children, pending trial. Granted, within 24 hours. Rebecca didn't like that. She escalated publicly. A local radio show picked up the story. Anonymous sources. Family friends concerned about an elderly woman's estate. I didn't listen. Instead, I prepared. I practiced answering questions without defensiveness, without sarcasm, without explanation. Why do you think Eleanor chose you? Because I was there. Did you ever feel entitled to her money? No. Do you feel guilty? No. Each answer landed cleanly. No justifications, no apologies. One night, after the kids were asleep, I opened Eleanor's final journal, not for evidence, for grounding. There was an entry I hadn't reread since the funeral. Hannah does not confuse care with ownership. That is why she deserves to own something, for once. I closed the book and felt my throat tighten, just once. Then I breathed through it. The week before jury selection, Rebecca requested one last mediation. This time, she came alone. She asked Charles if she could speak to me privately. He looked at me. No, I said. He relayed it. Her voice rose. I heard it through the glass. Not words. Tone. Later, Charles returned. She offered to settle, he said. 10 million to walk away. I didn't blink. And? I asked. And public silence, he added. Non-disparagement. I leaned back in my chair. She wants me to disappear, I said. Yes, he replied. No, I said. He nodded. I thought so. Jury selection began on the Monday. 12 people. Ordinary faces. No one special. No one cruel. Rebecca watched them like assets. I watched them like witnesses. When the judge asked if anyone had strong feelings about inheritance cases, one woman raised her hand. My father died last year, she said. People showed up I'd never met. She wasn't selected. Another man said, I believe caregivers are often underestimated. He was. I didn't smile. This wasn't about winning them over. It was about not lying to them. That night, I tucked Lily and Noah into bed and sat on the edge of Noah's mattress until his breathing evened out. "Mom," Lily said softly from her doorway.
"Yes?"
"Are we going to be okay?" I stood and walked to her.
"Yes," I said.
"No matter what." She nodded, trusting me in the way children do when they have no choice but to believe the adult who stayed. When I turned off the lights, I realized something. Rebecca thought the trial was the risk. It wasn't. The risk was everything that would be said out loud, under oath, in sequence, in front of people who had no reason to protect anyone. The risk was truth. And tomorrow, we would start telling it, one witness at a time. Trials don't start with drama. They start with logistics. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge introduced the case. The jurors settled into their seats with the careful posture of people who didn't yet realize how heavy the next few days would be. Rebecca sat at the plaintiff's table between my parents. Daniel took the seat behind them. He didn't look at me. I sat with Charles Redmond, hands folded, breathing steady. Opening statements went exactly as expected. Their attorney framed me as proximity turned power. A tired nurse, a lonely elderly woman, a relationship that blurred lines. He used phrases like vulnerable and influence without ever quite saying manipulation, letting the implication do the work. Then Charles stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace. "This case," he said, "is not about a nurse taking advantage of an elderly woman. It's about a family who didn't show up and couldn't stand the fact that someone else did." He paused long enough for the jurors to look up. "This will not be a case of opinions," he continued. "It will be a case of records." That word mattered. Records don't cry. They don't exaggerate. They don't care who raised you. The first witness was Eleanor's primary care physician, Dr. Susan Feldman. She was calm, direct, unimpressed by theatrics. "Did Eleanor Whitmore demonstrate cognitive impairment during the last 3 years of her life?" Charles asked. "No," Dr. Feldman said. "She was oriented, consistent, and decisive." "Was she evaluated?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "Multiple times." The opposing attorney tried to soften it. "Doctor, isn't it possible for elderly patients to experience moments of confusion?" "Of course," Dr. Feldman said. Eleanor didn't. No flourish. Just fact. The next witness was Eleanor's financial advisor, Mark Ellison. He testified to meetings Eleanor attended alone. Questions she asked. Decisions she revisited and confirmed. She understood the magnitude of her estate, he said, and she was clear about her intentions. Then came the social worker, Patricia Nguyen. She spoke about home visits, about Eleanor's independence, about Hannah Brooks never once interfering. That was when I felt it. The shift. The jurors stopped watching Rebecca. They started watching me, not with suspicion, with curiosity. The afternoon brought the first moment Rebecca didn't anticipate. Charles called Robert Klein, the city inspector. "Why were you sent to inspect Eleanor Whitmore's property?" Charles asked. "A zoning complaint," Robert said. "Filed by whom?" "Anonymous," he replied, but timed suspiciously close to the estate proceedings. "Find anything?" "No," he said. The house was well maintained. The opposing attorney objected. Judge overruled. Rebecca's jaw tightened. That night, I went home, exhausted but alert. The kids did homework at the table while I reheated leftovers. Normal life, held carefully in place. If you're listening to this and you think trials are won by one moment, let me tell you something. They aren't. They're won by accumulation. By the third day, it was my turn. I took the stand without hesitation. I answered questions about my education, my licensure, my work history. "How many hours did you work per week while caring for Eleanor Whitmore?" Charles asked. "Between 60 and 70, I said. "And how many were paid?" 40. The jurors wrote that down. The opposing attorney approached next. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "would you describe your relationship with Eleanor Whitmore as close?" "Yes," I replied. "Emotional?" he pressed. "Human," I said. He paused. "Did you ever feel entitled to her money?" "No." "Did you ever discuss her will?" "No." "Then how do you explain this inheritance?" he asked. I met his eyes. "She chose me." He frowned. "Based on what?" "Based on my presence," I said. "And my boundaries." There was a murmur in the room. "Boundaries?" he repeated. "Yes," I said. "I never asked for anything that wasn't my job." And when she offered more, I said no. He shifted tactics. Isn't it true you were under financial stress at the time? Yes, I said. And you had 2 young children? Yes. So you expect this jury to believe money wasn't a factor? I expect this jury to believe evidence, I replied. He stepped back. That was when Charles did something deliberate. He played Eleanor's video, not the strongest one, not the emotional one, the calm one. Eleanor sat in her chair, hands folded. I am not confused, she said. I am not coerced. I am choosing. The room was silent. When it was over, Charles rested his hands on the podium. No further questions. Rebecca testified the next morning. She cried when appropriate, paused for effect, looked at the jury like she was asking for protection. She isolated Eleanor, Rebecca said. She became everything. The opposing attorney nodded sympathetically. And how often did you visit Eleanor during that time? He asked. Rebecca hesitated. When I could. Charles stood. Ms. Miller, he said. How many times did you visit Eleanor Whitmore alone in the last 3 years of her life? Rebecca swallowed. I don't recall. Charles nodded. Would it refresh your memory to know we have visitor logs? The room shifted. Rebecca's face flushed. Perhaps once or twice, she said. And how many times did Hannah Brooks visit? Frequently, Rebecca snapped. Yes, Charles said. Because she worked there, Rebecca faltered. The next witness was my mother. Margaret cried. Spoke about family values. About betrayal. Charles asked one question. Mrs. Miller, when was the last time you visited Eleanor Whitmore without Hannah present? She froze. I don't remember, she said. That's because you didn't, he replied gently. Daniel was last. He spoke about stress, about my exhaustion, about concern. Then Charles asked him about the custody motion. You filed for emergency custody after the will contest began, Charles said. Yes, Daniel replied. And before that, I didn't think it was necessary. So your concern arose when money entered the picture. Daniel looked down. No further questions, Charles said. By Friday afternoon, the case went to the jury. I didn't wait in the courtroom. I went outside and sat on the courthouse steps, the sun warm on my face. Charles joined me. Whatever happens, he said, you told the truth. I nodded. That evening, I tucked Lily and Noah into bed and sat in the quiet afterward. Not thinking about verdicts or outcomes, just breathing. The jury deliberated through the night. When my phone rang the next morning, I knew before I answered. Charles's voice was steady. They've reached a verdict. I closed my eyes. The courtroom filled again. Rebecca's hands trembled in her lap. My parents sat rigid. The jury foreperson stood. We find, she said, that the will of Eleanor Whitmore is valid in full. Rebecca exhaled sharply. And we find no evidence of undue influence. I didn't move. The judge thanked the jury. The gavel struck. It was over. Or so I thought. Because as the room emptied, Rebecca turned to me. Her eyes weren't angry. They were cold. This isn't finished, she said. I met her gaze. It is for me. I walked out without looking back. But I didn't yet understand what losing would make her do. That came next, and it would cost her far more than money. Winning doesn't end a fight. It just changes the rules. The verdict landed on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, the consequences began. Not all at once, not loudly. The way systems respond when pressure is removed and weaknesses finally show. Rebecca didn't leave the courthouse with the rest of us. She stayed behind, speaking urgently with her attorney, hands moving in tight, controlled gestures. My parents avoided my eyes. Daniel slipped out a side door. I took the kids to school like any other day. Normalcy is a discipline. By noon, Charles Redmond called. They filed a notice of appeal, he said. I wasn't surprised. On what grounds? Procedural, he replied. They're grasping. Does it stop anything? I asked. No, he said. Probate proceeds. Assets transfer. The appeal won't survive. Good, I said. That afternoon, Eleanor Whitmore's estate officially closed. $30 million doesn't arrive like a check. It arrives in parts. Deeds, accounts, trust confirmations, documents that require signatures and patience. I signed everything calmly. And then I did something Rebecca never anticipated. I didn't spend $1. Instead, I hired 2 people. The first was a family law attorney named Julia Park, sharp-eyed and methodical. I retained her for one purpose only, to draw lines that could not be crossed again. The second was a forensic accountant named Michael Reyes. His job wasn't to look at Eleanor's money. His job was to look at my family. Specifically, Rebecca. Michael didn't ask many questions. He asked for names, businesses, timelines. Why? He asked once. Because people who accuse loudly are often hiding quietly, I said. He nodded. That's usually true. 3 days later, my mother called. Not crying this time. Angry. You embarrassed us, Margaret Miller said. You dragged this family through the mud. You dragged my children into court, I replied. We're done, she gasped. You can't cut us off. I can, I said. And I have. She hung up on me. That was fine. The first crack in Rebecca's world appeared on Wednesday. A former business partner contacted Michael. Anonymous tip. Then, documentation. Rebecca had been managing property investments through an LLC registered under Daniel's name. Rent payments had been misdirected, maintenance invoices inflated, taxes delayed. Michael brought me a preliminary report. She's been moving money, he said. Not illegal yet, but sloppy. How sloppy, I asked. Sloppy enough that she panicked when you won, he replied. I closed the folder. Keep going. By Friday, the local paper ran another article. This one mentioned Rebecca by name. Not about the will, about an ongoing civil dispute involving misappropriated funds and unpaid contractors. I read it once, then closed it. If this story is resonating, pause here. Like it if you understand what delayed justice feels like. Subscribe if you want to see what happens when tables turn quietly. And if you've ever been blamed for not staying small, leave a comment. You're not alone. Daniel called that night. Not defensive, not angry, scared. Rebecca's in trouble, he said. She made choices, I replied. She's saying this is your fault, he continued, that you set her up. I laughed softly. I didn't set anything up. I stepped out of the way. He was silent. Daniel, I said, don't call me again unless it's about the kids. He didn't argue. The next escalation came through my parents. They requested a meeting. Neutral ground, no lawyers. I declined. Then they showed up at my door. I didn't open it. My father, Thomas Miller, left a voicemail. We are your family, he said. This is going too far. I listened to it twice. Then I forwarded it to Julia. She filed a cease and desist that afternoon. Rebecca's appeal was dismissed 2 weeks later, unanimously. At the same time, Michael delivered his final report. It was thicker than the trial binder. Rebecca had commingled funds, misrepresented expenses, pressured tenants, failed to disclose conflicts of interest. I didn't leak it. I didn't threaten her. I forwarded it to her attorney with one note. For your awareness. The response came back within an hour. They wanted to talk. I declined. 2 days later, the state opened an inquiry. Rebecca stopped posting on social media. Daniel moved out of their shared house. My parents stopped calling. And in the middle of all that quiet unraveling, something else happened. I slept deeply, without waking at 3 a.m, to rehearse conversations or brace for the next blow. Lily started laughing more. Noah stopped asking why Grandma was mad. One evening, as I tucked them in, Lily asked, "Are we safe now?" "Yes," I said. "We are." I meant it. The following week, Eleanor's house officially transferred into a charitable foundation in her name. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. I funded scholarships for nurses specializing in elder care. I endowed a hospice wing. I made Eleanor's legacy visible in the way she would have respected. Rebecca couldn't touch it. No one could. The last message I received from her came late one night. You didn't have to destroy me. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed, I didn't destroy you. I stopped protecting you from yourself. I blocked the number. Chapter 9 ended there, not with revenge shouted from rooftops, but with consequences arriving exactly where they belonged. And the understanding that when you stop being useful to people who exploit you, they call it cruelty. I call it freedom. What came next wasn't loud. It was final, and it was mine. Freedom doesn't feel like relief at first. It feels like maintenance. Once the appeal was dismissed and the inquiries began, my life didn't suddenly become lighter. It became quieter. And quiet, I learned, requires attention. I changed locks. I changed phone numbers. I moved the kids to a different after-school program closer to home. Not because I was afraid, but because I no longer wanted my routines to be visible to people who had proven they would weaponize proximity. Julia Park called it post-conflict stabilization. I called it breathing room. Rebecca's name surfaced in places I didn't expect. Contractor forms, court dockets, a brief notice in the business section about an LLC dissolution. Nothing dramatic, just erosion. She tried once more to reach me, not directly, through my mother. Margaret Miller left a voicemail that sounded older than she did. "Your sister needs help," she said. "She's not well." I listened without interrupting. When the message ended, I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. Rebecca had never needed help when I was exhausted. When I was pregnant and working nights. When Daniel left. When the kids were sick and I had no backup. She needed help now because consequences had arrived. I forwarded the voicemail to Julia. Julia replied with one sentence. "No response is a response." At work, something unexpected happened. Karen Lopez offered me a new role, not a promotion in title, an expansion in trust. She asked if I would train incoming hospice nurses, mentor them, set standards. "You have a way of holding boundaries without hardening," she said. "That's rare." I accepted. Teaching felt different from caregiving, less urgent, more deliberate. I found myself choosing words carefully, aware that what I modeled would be repeated. One afternoon, a new nurse asked me, "How do you stay calm when families are difficult?" I thought for a moment. "By remembering whose needs I'm actually responsible for," I said. That answer stayed with me. Daniel complied with the custody order. No drama, no appeals. He showed up when scheduled, left when it was time. We spoke only through the parenting app. Distance made him smaller, manageable. Rebecca's investigation became public in stages. No single headline, just accumulation. Unpaid taxes, a civil claim, a licensing review. My parents stopped attending family events. Or maybe they attended and stopped being visible. Either way, the calls stopped. I didn't chase closure. I redirected energy. I set up a college fund for Lily and Noah, with rules so tight even I couldn't break them. I hired a security consultant to audit my digital footprint. I met with the trustees of Eleanor's foundation and listened more than I spoke. One evening, after the kids were asleep, I sat in Eleanor's old study. The house felt different now, less like an inheritance, more like a responsibility. I found a note she taped inside a drawer I hadn't opened before. "Hannah, wealth reveals character faster than grief. Protect your time." I smiled. The first real test of that advice came at Thanksgiving. No invitations arrived, no guilt-laced messages, no last-minute calls. I cooked anyway. Turkey breast, simple sides. Lily helped. Noah mostly tasted. We ate at the table together. Just us. Halfway through, Lily said, "I like it this way." "So do I said. That night, after the kids were in bed, I allowed myself to feel it. Not triumph, completion. Rebecca's attorney emailed Julia 2 weeks later. They were seeking a settlement in the civil matter Michael had uncovered. Quiet resolution. No admission of wrongdoing. I had no standing in that case. No need to respond. Julia asked me anyway, "Do you want to make a statement?" "No," I said. "Let the record speak." They did. By December, Rebecca was gone from every platform. Her business listings inactive, her phone disconnected. Daniel sent one message through the app. "I'm sorry." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry. Because I was done carrying conversations that asked me to make things easier for people who had made my life harder. The kids noticed the difference before I did. Lily slept through the night. Noah stopped chewing his sleeves. Our house felt predictable in the best way. One night, Lily asked, "Are we rich now?" I considered the question. "We're safe," I said. "That's different." She nodded, satisfied. Winter passed quietly. Spring arrived without announcement. On a warm afternoon, I took the kids to the park near Eleanor's house. They ran. I sat on a bench and watched, hands empty. I wasn't waiting for the next shoe to drop. There was no next shoe. That was the strangest part. Freedom wasn't an ending. It was the absence of anticipation. Chapter 10. ended there, with no confrontation pending, no revenge to complete. Just a life recalibrated around what I chose to protect, and what I would never again explain. The strange thing about peace is that it exposes what you've been postponing. Once the noise fell away, there were gaps in my days I didn't know how to fill at first. Not because I was lonely, but because I'd been living in reaction mode for so long that choosing felt unfamiliar. I noticed it one Tuesday afternoon, when I left work early. No emergency, no court date, no deadline chasing me out the door, just time. I picked up Lily and Noah from school and drove past our street without realizing it. Lily pointed it out gently, like she was handling something fragile. "You missed the turn," she said. I laughed and corrected course, embarrassed by how much my body had learned to expect pressure. That evening, after dinner, Lily sat at the table coloring, while Noah built something elaborate out of blocks on the floor. "Mom," Lily said without looking up, "are we still in trouble with Grandma?" I set the dish towel down and joined her at the table. "No," I said, "we're not." "Forever?" she asked. I considered how to answer honestly. "We're safe forever," I said. "Some people just don't get to be close anymore." She nodded slowly. "Like when you stop playing with kids who are mean." "Yes," I said. "Exactly like that." She went back to coloring. That was when I understood something clearly for the first time. The story wasn't following me anymore. I was choosing what came next. At work, the mentoring role grew into something formal. Administration asked me to design a training protocol for new hospice nurses. Not policies, practices. How to speak to families without absorbing their panic. How to document without losing empathy. How to leave work at work. I built it slowly, carefully. The nurses who came through my sessions didn't know my name from the news. They knew me as the one who listened before she corrected. That mattered. One afternoon, a nurse named Angela Ruiz stayed behind after a session. "How do you not take it home?" she asked. "The families, the accusations, the anger." I thought about Rebecca, about my parents, about the years I'd spent swallowing words. "You don't stop caring," I said. "You stop negotiating with people who don't." She looked relieved, like she'd been waiting for permission to think that way. That weekend, Julia Park checked in. "No updates," she said. "Which is good." "Thank you," I replied. She hesitated. "You handled all of this unusually well." "I had practice," I said. She laughed softly. "I believe that." After we hung up, I sat in Eleanor's study again. The afternoon light came in at a different angle now, warmer. I wasn't there to remember her. I was there to decide what to do with the space. I converted the back wing into offices for the foundation staff, left the front rooms intact, donated furniture Eleanor had loved to places she'd supported. I kept her desk. Inside the top drawer, I found one last envelope I hadn't seen before. No date, just my name. "Hannah, if you're reading this, then you've survived what they threw at you. I didn't leave you money because you needed it. I left it because I trusted you not to let it become a weapon. You will be tempted to explain yourself. Don't. You will be tempted to forgive prematurely. Wait. Your children will watch how you choose peace. That will matter more than anything you buy them. Eleanor." I sat with the letter in my lap for a long time. Then I folded it and placed it back in the drawer. That night, Daniel sent a request through the parenting app. He wanted to adjust schedules for the summer. Camps. Logistics. No apologies. No emotional hooks. I agreed to what made sense, declined what didn't. Our communication became efficient, transactional. And that was healthy. Rebecca's name came up once more. A former neighbor stopped me at the grocery store. She looked uncomfortable. "I heard about your sister," she said. "That must be hard." I smiled politely. "I hope she finds what she needs." It was true. I didn't need to see it happen. That was the difference between revenge and release. At home, routine solidified. Friday movie nights, Saturday pancakes, Sunday walks. Noah learned to ride his bike. Lily started piano lessons. Ordinary milestones that had once felt impossible under constant threat. One evening, while helping Lily practice, she stopped and looked at me. "You're different," she said. "How?" I asked. "You don't look tired in your eyes anymore," she replied. I swallowed. That was when I knew I had crossed the line between survival and stability. The world didn't reward me for it. There was no announcement, no apology tour, no reunion scene. Just consistency. Margaret Miller sent one final message in early spring. A birthday card for Lily. No note, just a gift card tucked inside. I let Lily decide what to do with it. She bought books. We didn't send a thank you. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. Some gestures aren't bridges, they're tests. And I no longer lived my life, proving I was safe to approach. By the time summer arrived, I had stopped checking court dockets, stopped anticipating messages, stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen. One afternoon, I took the kids to the beach. We sat on the sand, wind in our hair, the sound of water steady and indifferent. Noah fell asleep against my shoulder. Lily read beside me. I watched the horizon and realized something quietly definitive. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for forgiveness. Not for acknowledgement. Not for the family I was born into, to suddenly become the one I needed. I had already built what mattered. Not with a victory, but with a steady, unremarkable happiness that didn't need witnesses. The last chapter wouldn't be about what I escaped. It would be about what I chose to keep. The end didn't arrive with a conversation. It arrived on an ordinary morning when I realized I hadn't checked my phone in hours. It was early June. The windows were open. The house smelled like coffee and sunscreen. Lily was already awake, sitting at the table with a book open, one leg tucked under her. Noah was still asleep, sprawled sideways like he always did when he felt safe. I stood there for a moment, holding a mug I'd already forgotten to drink from, and understood something quietly important. Nothing was chasing me anymore. No hearings on the calendar. No filings pending. No inbox full of messages waiting to reframe my choices as cruelty or betrayal. The story had stopped asking me to participate. At work, the new hospice training program launched officially. My name appeared in the internal memo as the lead designer. Not celebrated, not explained, just acknowledged. That was enough. Later that week, Julia Park emailed me one last time. No further legal exposure. No outstanding issues. You're clear. I replied with 2 words. Thank you. Then I archived the thread. Daniel and I settled into a rhythm that required no emotion. Schedules adjusted, pickups coordinated, messages short and factual. One afternoon, as he dropped the kids off, he hesitated by the door. You see, I am, I replied. He nodded once, like he'd been looking for permission to accept that. He left without saying anything else. Rebecca never contacted me again. I learned through someone else that she'd moved out of state. Smaller place, different industry. No public presence. No explanations. I felt distance. And distance, I'd learned, was a form of mercy I could give myself. On Eleanor's birthday, I visited the foundation offices. The staff had placed a small arrangement on her desk. Simple, white flowers. I stood there alone and said thank you out loud, just once. Not for the money, for the foresight. That afternoon, I took Lily and Noah out for ice cream. We sat on a bench and watched people pass. Mom, Lily said, do you think Grandma and Aunt Rebecca are mad at us? I thought carefully. I think they're mad about choices, I said. But that doesn't belong to you. Okay, she said, and went back to her cone. That was the final proof I needed. The story had ended for them, but it had turned into something else for us. That summer, we traveled for the first time without checking costs first. Not extravagantly, thoughtfully. A rented house near the water. Mornings without alarms. Evenings without tension. One night, after the kids were asleep, I sat outside and listened to the ocean. I didn't think about courtrooms or inheritance or revenge. I thought about what I'd protected. My work, my children, my ability to choose silence over performance. People often ask whether I forgive my family. I don't answer that question directly. Forgiveness is personal. Boundaries are practical. I built boundaries. They built consequences. And the distance between those 2 things is where I live now. If you've stayed with this story until the end, thank you. Truly. If it meant something to you, take a moment to like it. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about quiet revenge, delayed justice, and choosing yourself without turning bitter. And if you've ever walked away from people who only valued you when you were useful, leave a comment. Someone reading might need to know they're not imagining it. I'm still a nurse. I still sit with people when they're afraid. I still hold hands at the end of things, but I no longer confuse endurance with love. The last thing Eleanor taught me wasn't about money or legacy. It was this, that when you stop negotiating your worth, the people who are using it leave on their own. And when they do, the room gets very quiet. That's not loneliness. That's peace. And for the first time in my life, I chose it every day without apology.